defensive war provoked by aggression by its enemies. Resolution 242 was then introduced by the British ambassador, and it was adopted unanimously by the Security Council on November 22nd, 1967. That resolution had something for both sides. On the one hand, it called for the, quote, withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict. On the other hand, it described the necessary backdrop for such a withdrawal as the right of, quote, every state in the area to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from the threats of, or acts of force. Since Israel had never denied the legitimacy or the existence of its sovereign Arab neighbors, the onus was clearly on the Arab enemies of Israel to acknowledge Israel's existence. Such acknowledgement, as you know, was not to be had, thus foreclosing the possibility of the, quote, secure and recognized borders that was contemplated by Resolution 242. Notwithstanding decades of information to the contrary, the text of Resolution 242 did not require Israel to withdraw the truce lines that existed before the war. Testimony by Arthur J. Goldberg, former Supreme Court Justice, who was then the U.S. ambassador to the UN, is telling. Goldberg wrote the following, quote, the notable omissions in language used to refer to withdrawal are the words the, all, and the June 5th, 1967 lines. There is lacking a declaration requiring Israel to withdraw from the territories occupied or all the territories occupied. Instead, the resolution stipulates withdrawal from occupied territories without defining the extent of the withdrawal. It can be inferred from the incorporation of the words secure and recognized boundaries that the territorial adjustments to be made by the parties in their peace settlements could encompass less than a complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from occupied territories. Goldberg's interpretation may understate the original meaning of Resolution 242. According to Gordon Brown, who was Britain's foreign secretary at the time, don't forget this was a British resolution. Gordon Brown, who was Britain's foreign secretary at the time, said that the explicit and well-understood point of the text was that, quote, Israel will not withdraw from all the territories. The final boundaries, in other words, are subject to negotiation in ways that will not jeopardize the security of any of the states. Since only Israel's existence is threatened by her Arab neighbors, Israel has never had any claim that only, for example, Israel has never made the claim that only Jews may live in the Middle East, or indeed that only Jews may live in Israel. This means that Israel's security must be assured by any final agreement. In 1967, in conclusion on this point, Israel fought not to extend its realm, but to preserve its very existence and to establish a secure border. These are actions with obvious legitimacy in international law. As Judge Stephen Schwiebel, who would later be the Chief Judge of the International Court of Justice, noted in a 1970 article, he wasn't yet Chief Judge when he wrote this article, as Schwiebel noted in a 1970 article in the American Journal of International Law, quote, where the prior holder of territory, in this case Jordan, where the prior holder of territory had seized that territory unlawfully, the state which subsequently takes that territory in the lawful exercise of self-defense has the better title. Israel's legal claim to Judea and Samaria is also supported by the principle of prescription. As the U.S. Supreme Court noted in the case of Arkansas versus Tennessee in 1940, prescription in international law refers to the acquisition of sovereignty over a territory through continuous and undisturbed exercise of sovereignty. The point of this principle is straightforward enough. It rests, in the words of the eminent legal scholar Lasse Oppenheim, on the same rational basis as prescription in national law, namely the creation of stability and order. Based on these criteria, Israel's claim to sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, while certainly not invincible, is plainly stronger than that of Jordan, Great Britain, who was the mandate holder, or Turkey, who was the prior holder before the World War I cessation of Turkish sovereignty. All of these parties were dispossessed from the West Bank long ago. Israel itself has been prudently silent about the legal nature of its presence on the West Bank, establishing numerous Jewish settlements, which is an act of sovereignty, while declining to exercise another act of sovereignty, i.e. declining to impose Israeli law on the virulently anti-Israeli indigenous population. Let me talk briefly about Gaza, since, as I was indicating, Gaza has been in the news not just since 2005, but even more recently with the flotilla and the discussion of the legality of the Israeli blockade, which is indirectly a discussion of Israeli borders. So in 2005, Israel forcibly evicted I was there actually. I wasn't there during the eviction, but I was there in Israel, I think it was 45 days before the eviction happened is when I left. That was a remarkable time. I've never seen such a internally torn population. They were forcibly, soldiers were coming in and were removing people from places where they had been born. But this not only resulted in the eviction of all Jews from Gaza, but it also resulted in the abandonment of the southern border of Gaza, the border with Egypt, which now would be controlled entirely by Egypt as opposed to having any kind of Israeli oversight. And there are, of course, as I'm sure you know, at the very least dozens and perhaps hundreds of tunnels now coming from the southern border into Gaza. Then we have the elections of 2007. Shortly after those elections of 2007, which were won by Fatah, there was a push by Hamas to take over the government of Gaza, and mass murder of Fatah supporters by Hamas supporters inside Gaza. Since that time, rockets have been launched onto Israel, as I was indicating, over 3,000 to date onto Israel. Each one of those rockets, each and every one of those rockets is an act of war. One rocket is an act of war. 3,000 rockets are 3,000 acts of war. I invite you to consider how the U.S. would react to rockets sent from Mexico, for example, that killed civilians in Texas, and I don't think there's much doubt how the United States would react. Indeed, the United States did react in 1834 to incursions from what was then Upper Canada in an extremely violent way that made it clear that the United States would defend its territory against these acts of war. I don't know if you can see this up there, but that's just a very incomplete list of Israelis, both Jewish Israelis and Arabic Israelis, killed by Qassam rockets fired from Gaza. And this is incomplete. That's not all the people that were killed, and there are, of course, hundreds seriously injured. And I can, if you need corroboration of any of this, just email me afterwards. I thought it would be useful to read an excerpt from the Daily Mail of October 11, 2010 by Peter Hitchens, certainly not a friend of Israel. Hitchens wrote an article for London's Daily Mail entitled "Lattes, Beach Barbecues, and Dodging Missiles in the World's Biggest Prison Camp." He's writing from Gaza, and he writes as follows: "It is lunchtime in the world's biggest prison camp, and I'm enjoying a rather good cafe latte in an elegant beachfront cafe. Later I'll visit the sparkling new Gaza Mall." I'll show you the Gaza Mall in a bit. He took a picture of it. "Later I'll visit the sparkling new Gaza Mall. Then I'll eat an excellent beef stroganoff in an elegant restaurant. Perhaps it's callous of me to be so self-indulgent, but I think I at least deserve the coffee. I would be having a stiff drink instead if only the ultra-Islamic regime hadn't banned alcohol with a harsh and heavy hand. Just an hour ago I was examining a 90-foot deep smuggling tunnel leading out of the Gaza Strip and into Egypt. This excavation within sight of the Egyptian border troops who are supposed to stop such things is unbelievably officially licensed by the local authority as a trading project. Registration fee £1,600. The smuggling tunnels were until recently used for the import of cattle, chocolate, and motorcycles, though not, its owner insists, for munitions or people. It at its peak earned more than £30,000 a day in fees. But business has collapsed because the Israelis have relaxed many of the restrictions on imports, and most such tunnels are going out of business. While I was there, I heard the whine of Israeli drones and the thunder of jet bombers up far overhead. Don't please accuse me of complacency or denying the truth. I do not pretend to know everything about Gaza. I don't think it's a paradise or remotely normal, but I do know for certain what I saw and heard." This is a picture taken on October 11, 2010 by Peter Hitchens of a very well-stocked Gaza Mall. And he took other pictures as well that you can find in that Daily Mail report. Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of the British troops in Afghanistan, testified before the United Nations Human Rights Council. Don't get me started on the UN Human Rights Council, but Colonel Kemp testified before the UN Human Rights Council on June 16, 2010 that, quote, "I do not think there has ever been in the entire history of human conflict